focus on this data vault modeling. We feel that it's got so much value to add, and we're really keen on exploring this as much as possible. So just before I hand over to Hans, as we did with data literacy with Kathy Rondon, I didn't actually ask Hans, but we'd like you all to ask appropriate questions and questions that are important to us. And Hans would then, at the end of the day, give us a judgment on who asked the best question, and then we'll sponsor a free book of Hans's. I've got it standing over here. This is, it's all blurred, but so we'd love to have you guys engage and just ask as many questions as possible. I'm sure Hans enjoys that as well, and we'll see what we can do at the end of the session. All over to you, Hans. Thank you very much.
All right, perfect. Thanks. I'm assuming we're starting about 55 minutes from here. Is that correct?
When you say starting 5 minutes from here?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. 55 minutes starts now, I guess. I'm just putting my timer on so I don't go over. Speaking of, I have to have a big clock going right here next to me, or else
okay.
You never know what's going to happen next in my world. So, okay, perfect. Let me go ahead and put this up for you and share it. So give me 1 second here. All right. The wonder of technology. Gotta love it. We are more of a Zoom shop, you know. But of course.
Yeah. We actually we started off with Zoom, and then with that lockdown and the banks being that Zoom where people were entering into Zoom meetings unannounced, all the banks just closed it down. So we had some challenges.
No, true. And I mean, I think obviously they resolved the problem, but at the time that was not a good thing, of course.
No, sure.
Missed the mark on that. Yep. Okay, good. Well, listen, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for joining. I'm really looking forward to this. And Howard, is it correct that we're kind of kicking off Vault now with this session for your 3-month focus?
Is the first session. This is the first session, and we wanted you to lay the foundation, and then we have somebody that does a data modeling tool and some implementation that will follow on after this. And they said that they've used some of your examples before in Excel, and they will put it together.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, I appreciate being the kickoff for the Vault topic. So thanks for that as well. Really happy to be here. As we discussed just earlier, I kind of wish I was there more physically, being as it's a little bit cold.
Yeah, that would be nice.
I got to say, though, honestly, if I was in Stockholm or here as I am now in Colorado, it's still snowy and cold either way. But this is fun. At least it's nice in the office, right? So, okay.
Don't complain and just start the presentation, Hans.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is actually just go through. Now, what I will tell you is a lot of the material around Vault now obviously has been here for quite some time. We've been working on this kind of modeling pattern since about 99, 2000. So you can figure it's well over 20 years that this has been out there. So now in Europe, in areas in Nordics, it's vastly more popular than it is in some other places, but it's certainly much more so a known commodity these days than it was a while back. As you mentioned, Howard, there's going to be some examples of people looking at some of the things we've used for the presentations and such. So what I'm doing here is kind of take us through more or less why we're doing it, how we get this done, what are the main principles, and definitely leave some time for questions. And I think that's an important part of it. My guess is the majority, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, please, the majority of people that are on it probably heard of, seen something from Vault prior to this point. So this will, hopefully not shock you when we go through the premises, but I'm also prepared to get into the details as we get further along as well. Okay. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and kick in. The first thing I would say is with enterprise data warehousing, even today, and this was true quite some time back, of course, but even today, we have still quite a bit of issues when we work with integrated data. And we get into a lot of the reasons why that is in the course. I mean, not extensively, but we take some time to talk about it. But one of the key factors is agility, and that is responding to changes is a little bit tough to do. Main reason for that is we tend to fix things, that is to say codify it, make it more complete, refine it with the details a bit too early. And then, of course, anytime new subject areas come in or changes come, there's re-engineering costs, more time, and it just becomes difficult once you've kind of hardened that architecture. Now, as it turns out, these issues are common to anything in data warehousing. Obviously, anytime you do enterprise integration initiatives, if you've worked in the past with SOA, service-oriented architecture, and that kind of thing, when you look enterprise-wide, the ability of that system or that program to adapt to change becomes much more of a, I guess, profound requirement. Other elements, of course, is the business focus, enterprise-wide scope, customization, auditability. These are common semantics. This is all, I would say standard challenges, not the ones that have been killing us, but the ones that also have to be taken into account when we work on these kind of initiatives. So in the end, what we realized, I think that this, as you've heard probably before, this was kind of a global realization. I think that's what happens when you have such a young industry. We start out with integrated non-volatile time-variant subject-oriented data as defined in 84 with Inman. And from that point forward, you say, now let's try it, let's make it happen. And as we go, we figure out the challenges along the way. So when we got to this level, probably late 90s, as we tried to provide more of an enterprise view in our quasi, I would say siloed, I don't mean that in a negative way, federated Mart environments, we ended up saying, well, this is what we now need, right? So we need something that, from a modeling perspective, that must, of course, be agile. It has to have a business focus instead of a source focus. And by the way, for those of you queuing up questions, if anybody has a question on that, please let me know, because again, the easy, quick answer is we have more than one source. If you have 200 sources in a banking environment, that's a small number for most banking environments. But the point is, even if you're a smaller, medium organization, you have 5 sources, it's always more than one, right? So each of those is not going to have an enterprise view. The enterprise view is going to have to come from a business model. I think we're all in the awakening at this point, eyes wide open. I don't think we miss that anymore. We have to support, obviously, the enterprise-wide scope. This is also about agility, adapt to changes. Remember, there's 2 parts about agility. One is incremental build, and the other one is adapting to change. So we need to support, obviously, both. They're under the same umbrella. Bitemporal historization must be fully auditable. Very low re-engineering time and cost, so we can realistically make this happen. Common semantics, and then, enable integration, fluid and adaptable architecture. These are all things that we need to have from our modeling paradigm. So here's a picture, probably been in several presentations, but I tend to like this quite a bit. The heart of Vault, Anchor, Focal, 2G, head inversion, several techniques that arrived in a similar time window. I would say 99 to 2005-ish, in that range, is when these techniques all popped up. They're really based on this premise, which is, hey, look, this gentleman here says every time anything changes, it impacts the entire thing, right? That's where all that re-engineering comes in. And so someone finally realizes, hey, why don't you just separate those things that change from the things that aren't changing? That's, if you kind of look at that very simple thought, that's that's kind of where we started in this discussion, right? Yeah, why are we putting everything together? And of course, we can deep dive into that and get more into that in Q&A later. But basically, all modeling has been predicated on the assumption of being able to find a unique instance and flag it with some kind of key, and then have a key dependency for everything that defines or describes or relates it. That's just basically the definition of all modeling, from concept to 3NF to even dimensional. If you look at how you roll in outliers or how you work around fact tables. So it's a really, let's put it this way, it's such a universal truth that questioning that universal truth or messing with a recipe is sometimes a little bit difficult for our brains to get to, and also a little bit counterintuitive at first brush. Okay, so but basically this is the snapshot of what we mean, which is if we are able to break things out into smaller component parts, right? That would be for the purposes of being flexible, i.e. agile, but also in data warehousing to be able to facilitate capturing things that are either interpreted in different ways or are changing independently of each other, right? And of course, interpreted in different ways comes from all the different sources and what their subject areas are and what their scope is, what their function is. And changing independently, of course, is all about how things change over time. And these things can change at all different rates. That is context and relationships, right? Can change over time. So if you think about it, we've kind of had the answer prior to that point all along, because when we first attempted the data warehousing using a kind of boil the ocean, do everything at once, 3NF approach, we recognized early that we couldn't make that happen because we'd have to spontaneously combust the entire warehouse at one time, and it wouldn't be easy to change it, right? So the result was it forced us to push these subject areas, functions, divisions, different areas into separate structures in the warehouse. Same exact thing happened again with dimensional warehousing and federated marts. Is the pressure after you started to really put more subject areas in, the pressure was there to split the dimensions into many dimensions, because you had to say, I just can't re-engineer this dimension one more time. I just can't go and change it again. It's too many attributes, too complicated. So we split them. So this force of breaking into parts has been a natural progression of warehousing in 3NF, in dimensional, in whatever, over time. So this basically says, hey, look, after a while, if you can't beat them, join them, right? I mean, if we can't get to just the enterprise view magically and we keep breaking into parts, okay, let's follow that assumption. Let's break into parts, right? So the problem is, and this is where you may ask the question, why were we not breaking it up? And that came down to the fact that we would get data anomalies if we had multiple copies of things. We would get issues of not having one standard view of a concept enterprise-wide. We had to have a key dependency and roll it in. This, of course, happened in 3NF, but also happened with dimensional modeling and conformed dimensions, right? The conformed dimension with the theory being it would be complete enterprise-wide and mean the same exact thing for all facts that use it across the entire federated mart environment. So the theory of that, let's say, consistency being driven by key dependency was there all along. So now, again, here's where unified decomposition comes in, just trying to give you the simple view of it. Break things apart. Now, okay, we're following that pattern. However, retain the key dependency. Retain the key dependency, meaning that we still have, as a discipline for ourselves now, the requirement to make sure that when you have an entity that's defined by, in this case, let's say if we want to look at the idea of like a customer, there's going to be a key in here, and that key is going to tie together all the one relations and all the attributes. There has to be a key here that also is going to tie all those same things together. That's basically it. So once you retain the key dependency, even though these are separate technically from a modeling perspective and from a physical perspective, they're separate tables, but we can now say they will retain the key dependency as if they were embedded, embodied in a single physical entity. Now this, if you take a look at this picture, I still consider this to be the most important diagram here because it's really conveying what's going on here. And one of the critical things you may notice, even though this is a very high level picture, is that we're not here in the business of trying to model hubs, links, and satellites, right? It's not your goal to go in and say, yeah, I'm going to model some links there, some satellites today. Basically, we're modeling core business concepts. And when you model a core business concept, in our view, right, you're saying, I guess what we've been saying forever, which is person, place, thing, event, right? It's some kind of a person, place, thing, or event we want to capture, right? Something that's important to the business. So what is that, of course? Well, I mean, customer, product, employee, sale, return, whatever it is, these are the concepts we model. And then if we were to look at traditional modeling, of course, they would be embodied, like in this case, customer, in a physical table that has embedded in it the key, which represents the unique identifier, in this case, across the enterprise, hopefully, but certainly in a division or a business unit or an application that would be within its four walls. It's unique. And then it has relationships, which are represented here in the green. The relationships would be, how it relates to other concepts in this model, right? How it relates to other concepts. And then the yellow here is context. And this context here is going to be basically anything that describes, defines, and tracks the historical journey of whatever is in here. And of course, like we've discussed before, this context has to have a direct relationship on the key, wherein it's a one-to-one relation. It just it has to, right? There's no possibility for embedding something here outside of a loosely structured JSON concept or something. You can't put an attribute in here that shouldn't be depending solely and directly on the key of the table that it's in. Likewise, you couldn't have multiple active concurrences of any one of those attributes because, well, there's a single record under a single key. You get one, let's say, for example, home address. Nonetheless, if you look over here, the same exact thing should be true. Any context in here should have a one relation to the key, okay? But you're going to look at a table in that environment and say to yourself, yeah, okay, that's true, but I could, right? I could change the cardinality. I could change the key of a satellite. I could change the key of the cardinality of a link and make it its own thing. You could, of course you could. You're in charge of your models, right? You could do whatever you want to do. Physically, it's not going to prevent you from doing it. Of course it's not. If you look at what we do with databases today, we either are using some kind of a SQL RDBMS, whether it's physical or whether it's in the cloud somewhere, or even if you're streaming, whatever, or you're using a model that can be representing that form of relationships, right? That's what we do. So either way, we have some kind of a SQL-esque type representation of all the models we do, right? So we know we can structure the concept, the idea of a table or a view, and build it to be whatever we want it to be. You can. But what we're saying here now is you want to be able to build your Vault model in such a way, and this is a transition here, that it also can be represented this way, right? Now, and let's think about that for a minute. So if you're building a vault model and you have a bunch of hubs and links and satellites all over your model, right? That's basically what we work with. If you are building a vault model and you have that available to you, right, then you should be able to take all that satellite context and roll it in to the, makeshift, create your own just single table out of it. And all the attributes being captured and all those satellites that surround it should fit into the idea of a single entity or dimension. And it should all have just a single key dependency. Why? Because, well, that's how we got here. I mean, that's how we got here in the first place. That's what the pattern is. It's unified decomposition. Now, what will end up happening, you're going to find, is as we've been applying this principle, over the course of 20 plus years, we tend to walk off the farm, right? We tend to walk off the farm. And what I mean by that is we tend to say, well, I like this satellite, but I'd like to make it its own key to accommodate a context array, for example. I've got address, but I want home address, billing address, shipping address. So I'm going to add another key to the satellite and have a multi-value. Or I'm going to take a link and say it has its own meaning. I'm going to refer to it as some kind of event or configuration name, and I'm going to put satellites on this context. Anyway, when you do that, what you're doing is you're just saying, yeah, you know what? It's just a little bit of a walk away from where I'm supposed to be, so I'm just going to go ahead and take control because I can, right? The problem is that if you want to go back to how we got here in the first place, it's the need for agility, incremental build, and historization and auditability, all the reasons why we do this method. You're going to compromise that architecture if you make any of those kind of changes, right? So now you can learn from us. You can try yourself. I always like the idea of let's not reinvent the wheel 100 times. I mean, we can reinvent the wheel, okay, a couple dozen times is fine, but let's not go too crazy here. Let's at least, and by the way, I don't know the audience as to how many people are actively working Vault projects right now, or have gone a little bit deeper into the theory. But I can tell you that just like with a lot of things, if you focus first on the pure model, if you focus first on a pure model of unified decomposition for this method, then as you've been into it for years, look at where you can back off and make some kind of exception to your rule. Yeah, that's fine. But if you come into this starting day one and say, I'm the smartest person in the room, I can do whatever I want, I'm going to go change it. You take a word for it, you will run into issues ultimately, or you may very luckily just not run into an issue, but very likely you run into some kind of issue. And let's again get back down to this example of, say, home phone number. In this example here, I've got a home phone number for a customer, and there's some kind of a business key. In this case, the business key is like customer code. And the idea would be that for a particular record, let's say this is a record for Hans, right? So it's customer code is HH102. So whatever it is, it's a code for customer. That is unique in our environment, so that when I pull up HH102, I get one record. And in that one record, it has a bunch of attributes. There's one attribute here that says home phone, which means that I can have one home phone, and that's it. I can't have 5. I can't have different ones. I get to have one home phone number. That's all there is. And I do that where the database itself and your model, by the way, from a logical theoretical perspective, the actual table itself is maintaining and enforcing that relationship. It's not possible for me to put 2 concurrently active phone numbers in here. right? I can't, because there's only room for one. I could augment with an additional attribute that says home 2 or whatever, or home downstairs or home office or whatever you have, but you can't put two into the same. So if you remember that rule, when you go to your Vault model and you say, here's a satellite with home phone number, right? Just remember that the relationship here to what was your business key, in this case, the customer code, has to always be 1 to 1. It has to be 1 to 1. If it's 1 to many, you're not doing Vault modeling, and this is not unified decomposition. It's not Ensemble, because again, we've already done that. I mean, we've already been through this when we had to break apart 3F models to make it work because it was too much to boil the ocean. We've already done this when the idea of conformed dimensions became too arduous because the re-engineering was too difficult. And we created mini dimensions, used factless facts to tape them together so we could keep some kind of semblance of continuity. We've already been there. So let's not go back to what we've already tried for decades and recognized did not work. Okay, let's give a try to the method that says retain the key dependency, but allow for multiple tables for the purpose of agility, flexibility, adapting to change, things that change at different rates, whatever the reason for your division, right? Separation of concerns here, retain the key dependency. Now, if you can focus on that, what will end up happening is that you'll get a very strong model. In this case, you'll get a very strong model, and that's what we want to try to focus on is how do we keep this from falling apart. By the way, this you can tell is just an attributed picture of the one above that we saw on the previous slide. But if you take a look at it, you can see, I guess beyond anything else that you'll see in this presentation, this is it, right? This is what we're doing. Now, there's two parts to this picture, obviously. One is that we're doing unified decomposition. The second part is, of course, we're in a enterprise warehouse mode, so we're also contemplating historization. We'll get into that in just another minute in another picture. So back. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
We just got a question from Mark. Mark's just got his hand up.
Yeah, Mark, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the question about the date timestamp on your customer phones table there is like implies that this is either a changing dimension over time, or that you can have more than one home phone number over time. But I'm not seeing that seeing how that fits in with this overall modeling capability. Can you answer to that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, and thank you. That's actually good timing for a good question on that. The first thing I can tell you is that when it comes to the hubs and the links, you can just as easily just eliminate the date timestamp on here because they are not historized. There's no adding another hub key as of another point in time. What ends up happening with both links and with hubs is that the load date timestamp there is just the first time I ever saw it. But the only thing that will trigger a change or an addition of a new record into a hub is going to be another key. The actual, in this case, the sequence is a one-to-one with the enterprise-wide key, in this case, customer code. So there will ever and only be one instance of any one particular identifier in a hub. There can never be the possibility of more than one. So that's the first one. Now, when you get down to the satellites, you're absolutely correct. These are basically dimensions, if you want to consider it from that perspective, right? So they are type 2. So now the key here is actually a two-part key. So what it's basically telling you is, here's the information concerning phone numbers about this one particular customer and how those phone numbers have changed over time. But there will ever only be one concurrently active record. So now that, by the way, works identically to what happens with a conformed historized dimension, right? Or, well, it doesn't have to be conformed. Any historized type 2 dimension, wherein, again, you have the key itself, which identifies the instance of the concept, and then you have it as it changes over time, being layered on with different date time stamps to separate those records. So, and by the way, what happens here is that these increments now, so you have, by the way, from a technical perspective, and that's probably an important thing to mention here. By the way, one thing I did not mention is one of the best things to bring with you when we're discussing this form of modeling is to try to bring an open mind, because you have to really put your brain on it a little bit. From a purely physical perspective, right? This relationship is one to many, right? I mean, physically, that's what it is, because we have to accommodate changes over time. The reason why I'm really, contemplating the point or presenting the point that it's a one-to-one is it's one-to-one concurrently active, one-to-one at any one given point in time. And that's, by the way, true for dimensional modeling. If you look at dimensional modeling as well, if you have a key that's enterprise-wide for a dimension of customer, right, that has a one-to-one relationship with all its context. But you may have 12 records in that dimension for the same key, but only one record will be active at the same time, right? It's only because of history that you have multiple records. So now in here, we're basically saying there's a non-temporal aspect to hubs and links and a temporal aspect to satellites. So we've kind of blended the idea of temporality, right? Of course, this, the further you get into it, is so much more beautiful than I think we ever realized in the beginning, because now what ends up happening is in your entire warehouse, 5-8 years into working with it, for a particular key instance of a customer, for example, you will only have a hub record with that key in there one time ever. That's beautiful. Whereas if you're using other forms of techniques, every time it changes, you have another copy of the key. Here, only the things that change get incremented with additional copies, and like in that satellite. But the instance of the key itself, the underpinnings of the whole model, are always just one and never change, right? That's actually foundationally a really strong underpinning for a warehouse. Does that help to answer that question, or did I miss you on that?
No, it does. It does help answer. From a query perspective, writing SQL, that would still be pretty complex to pull out the latest record, but that's okay. I get the answer, so that's good. Thank you, Hans.
Yeah, well, let's, and by the way, let's not get too deep into that earlier on in the presentation, but I will tell you that there's some huge benefits to the querying aspects of this as well. You have to kind of retain that, keep an open mind as you move forward. One of them is, here, for example, we can go to like an is current flag, assuming that you can end date, well, uncheck that flag for a prior record. That is to say, update a prior record, which most tooling allows for these days and procedures. So that's an easy way to find it. But also keep in mind that you're always going to be now joining to attributes that are a subset, i.e. only the ones you're really looking for, and on the same key from where you started, which in this case is the customer code. So instead of looking into the attributes under the dimension and finding the proper time frame that you're interested in, you're just getting the key and then grabbing directly from the satellite attributes itself the one you're looking for. So let's just say that the short word is there's some definite benefits. I would say for joining the additional things that Howard's coordinated with you in this quarter of the year, when you get the tooling vendors in, definitely ask them more about the efficiencies of this, because in a lot of ways it becomes substantially more efficient with these repeating patterns and some of the inner versus outer joins and less data to parse through and all that kind of good stuff. So, all right, let's yeah, no worries.
Sorry, Hans.
Yeah.
There was just another question there, and well, two things. One is Tobias reminded me it was Data Vault Builder that I'm actually going to talk on the next session, and then Donovan has actually raised the question of when you have MPP or your massive parallel processing engines that load, they can't cater for that data integrity when performing the loads into the data models. Is there some level of serialization that you do to help that along, or how do you handle that? Is that more of a technical issue you want to talk about later?
Yeah, it's more of a technical issue. I'm going to punt on that maybe until you get those guys in, but I will tell you just in general, what we do is we take basically a loading, I guess, paradigm of doing all hub loads first. And then once you finished all your hub loads, so you're complete with that set of hub loads, then we do all the satellite and link loads. What's happening there is that we're just assuring that the instances of the keys of those concepts are already loaded prior to describing them in satellites or connecting them via links. So that's the one element of it. Of course, and this is where you can get into Data Vault Builder and talk more into the tooling. But of course, now from there, the jobs that run satellites, for example, should also then have authority to create that key if required, and then it gets on to how we run it. But again, you're going to find that it's going to feel different than what we've done before, absolutely. But there's also the I guess once you discover the implications, you're going to find that there's some strong benefits as well that in this case have and I do historically and do today actually provide more of a net benefit when we go forward. And one of the things here is extreme parallelism, really, because it doesn't matter what order you load all your hubs in. And then once they're in, it doesn't really matter what order you load all your satellites and links in, because the only key reference you're ever going to have here is going to be to a hub sequence. So there's no other nested sets of foreign keys. And that's one of the really interesting things about this model is that you notice links are all modeled as many-to-many associations. Right? Now, they don't have their own identity, so they don't mean anything. They can only represent the end status of an occurrence, right? In other words, a customer owns vehicle, whatever, or a customer is on this sale. We don't get into the reasons how they got to own that vehicle. That would be a different concept. But the end result of whatever is the foreign key constraint or set of constraints that remain is what we capture in links, but they're all captured in many-to-many. Vault is not capable then to manage, control specific cardinality between concepts. Of course it does maintain specific cardinality with regard to satellite attribution. The satellite attributes, again, home phone number in this case, have to have a one relationship with one instance of the key. However, the links in this case do not, right? So if you look at, in this case, there's a foreign key reference here, right, to customer class SID, right? Customer class SID would be, this customer has been grouped and classified using this classification. In this embedding of the foreign key into the entity, it actually enforces that there can only be one, right? Whereas over here, this one, right, says, hey, there's a relationship between customer and its class, but it's always going to represent it as many-to-many. Now, that means, of course, again, we can't enforce that referential integrity between concepts, but we can now design natural business relationships and links, right, that will accommodate whatever data comes in. And of course, if that relationship is violated or changes over time, which we know in warehousing is an everyday occurrence, right? There's no structural change to the model, right? So we count on the enforcing of those business rules to occur on data capture in the system of record where it should happen. Here, we capture what's already been, we copy what's already been captured, and it's not within our purview to enforce the rule. Now, we can, of course, flag the rule being broken and show that to the business, say, hey, guess what? You broke your rule. You got 3 classes here for the same customer, whatever. And that would be very probably informative for them to have, and they can look at their business processes and try to fix them. That would probably be good. But we're not going to prevent it from loading based on a cardinality rule. Okay. Of course, keep in mind, we do enforce that on all satellite attribution, which has to be 1 for every key at a point in time. Okay. So, all right, cool. This is now getting into just what we do, and I think most of you know this, but I'm just going to throw it out there again. How we do it, I would just refer to the parts. The hub, which is this blue part in the middle, is just our key, and that's these are the 3 elements of all vault modeling. So I'm just going to put them out there. It's the unique instance of each of those records, and that's all it is. The link is going to represent the natural business relationship between concepts. And you're going to notice here with links, you're going to have several. And actually, that's a super interesting thing, because a link can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever different foreign keys in it that it's relating. Okay. But you're going to have more than one link because there's going to be different natural business relationships. So for example, if you have an employee that works at a store, you could have a link that says, employed by this store. But if you might have another employee that manages the store. So you say the employee manages the store. Those are 2 different links, right? Now, of course, in something like a 3NF model, you might have a typed association, or you might have it doesn't matter what you have there. The point is here, we're able to separate those different forms of natural business relationships into separate links. That actually does a lot for us as we move forward. I mean, one of the biggest things about warehousing is recognizing that we're not building a warehouse based on all the requirements we have today, even if we could. But let's say we could. It's still not about that. We're building it to be flexible, to adapt to the requirement that's coming tomorrow that we don't know about yet. So that's the thing here, is when we build a natural business relationship for employee works for store, it might be a year later before you recognize there's another one that says employee manages store, that became an important part of what we do. So when that comes, we add a new one. There shouldn't have to be re-engineering, repurposing, typing, role-playing, all those other things, because that's what causes our, slide or walking off the farm towards trying to harden a model that can't be hardened, because we know we're going to keep it over time, and it's going to change over time. Different subject areas will have different elements to bring in, right? The last part is a satellite, and this is all context and also all history. Normally, I really make a really important distinction here, because satellite, again, just to reiterate, is the only thing that can also track history. There really is no historical tracking happening in hubs and links, because it's only the first time you ever saw it. They never change. They're always going to be there. Okay, so that's an important facet of the difference between them. But nonetheless, the big part here is, if I have something like a customer, they are embodied in this circle, which happens to, in this case, to be an entity. In this case, they're embodied in a circle, happens to be what we call an entity. And in this case, they're embodied in a circle called a dimension. In each case, it's one instance of one concept, i.e. customer, all its context and its relevant, I would say, controlled or one relationships is what we refer to. Okay, so now
Sorry, Hans.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Hans, you can tell us to move on. We just got a question from Gaucher. Gaucher, would you like to ask your question now on links and satellites?
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Gaucher, and I personally like the Vault. I've played around with it a lot. Maybe just something that I haven't. So the links, can the links also refer to a URI, something like a uniform resource location of something else? So if you, I'm just thinking you can link this up to Facebook with certain parameters, and then you get back certain information about that person. So maybe things that is not stored within the Vault.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can do that, as well as you can have satellites that entirely live outside the Vault, and even could be you know, document references,
Yeah,
or
okay.
or whatever. You can absolutely do that. And you know, I would say that you'd have a decision as to whether those are attributes within a satellite in the way that the model is referenced, or whether it's a link to something outside it. It could be either one.
Okay. I can
So,
also,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, maybe the last thing is in terms of the satellites. So
Mhm.
I was hearing someone refer to, you know, you need to know what is the latest address or something, or the home phone number. So something like a satellite could also, you could use something like a Postgres database, which captures times when you add the row value. So that could also, is that also something that's possible?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So, you know, there's a lot now that's happening, obviously, Microsoft Teradata, Postgres, whatever, wherein you can use a temporal RDBMS, basically, approach, so that the time versioning is occurring inside the database, instead of us managing the time through two-part keys, right, or whatever it is. So I would say that, yeah, it's more of a technical deployment issue. However, you can leverage those facets of those tools. I still would say that from a logical design perspective, we want to look at hubs and links as things that are not versioned, ideally, and we can get into the further details into that later. By the way, mostly people don't have an issue with the idea that hubs are not versioned. People do like the idea of timeline versioning links. That's one of the you know, hottest topics, I would say, in a 10-year window for Vault, is the discussion as to whether we time version through satellites link entries, so that we can you know, go ahead and end date links if they're no longer considered to be valid or current. But in by the way, I would recommend that be a conversation for another session, for a deeper dive. And if those of you interested in a deeper dive, please let's contemplate that. I do have an older post on LinkedIn that gets into that topic, and there's a few other things that you can look at. But let's just put it this way: there are kind of strong implications with regard to time tracking and I guess effectivity tracking of links that are worthy of your attention prior to just doing it. So
Thank you very much.
okay. Yep, no worries. Okay, this one we've kind of already covered, so I'm not going to get into more detail on it, because we did talk already about the type 2. Here I just painted a type 2 dimension on the right side here to show that we're basically doing the same kind of thing here on the temporal aspect. The only thing that's interesting here to call out is, you know, if, let's say, the changes to the context of a customer over a 10-year window maybe include 20 changes, right, over time on average by customer. Well, what's going to happen, right, is that your 3NF table here, your entity, is going to end up having been incremented 20 times, right? So there's going to be some kind of a set of records here where this is 20 times been incremented. Sorry, my drawing is not very pretty. I apologize for that. I'm trying to get more pretty here. And then likewise, in a type 2 dimension, of course, we end date the prior record, insert a new record. And if there's been, over the course of 10 years, 20 changes, we can count on there being 20 records in here, which does mean that the actual code itself, the actual key for this table, right, is going to be, is going to exist in this table 20 times. And it's also going to exist here 20 times, right? In a vault model, this customer code, or whatever the key is, will always exist one time. There's never going to be another copy of it. Even though, of course, the various increments of whatever it was that happened to change, they moved, their loyalty was changing actually quite a bit in those 20 times. Maybe that was 15 of the changes were around loyalty scores changing. And maybe they changed phone numbers a couple times, right? These will be incremented, of course, at various rates, but the code itself, the key, is only represented in the whole warehouse one time. That's just to reiterate. One of the agility factors here, and then I'll wrap this up as quick as I can here, but there's two things happening here. On the left side, we've got a vault model without any satellites on it. And the reason for that is just that if you look at a vault model with only hubs and links, you're going to be looking at core business concepts and natural business relationships, which is probably a good way to see the backbone of your business map, right? That's pretty straightforward. On the right side, you notice we have the entire model built out, and in this case, all the satellites are on it. And yeah, typically there's anywhere from 1, 2 to 5 or 7 satellites maybe on a concept, depending on how much you have to say about it. When we introduce now this idea of supplier as a new expansion to the scope of our warehouse, all we need to do to include it is to grab the key from product, grab the key from supplier, throw them in a link, and now we've augmented the model. Well, that's great, because if it were true that the product could only have one supplier, like this product only comes from one supplier, so it's would have been an embedded foreign key. In a 3NF environment, entity or dimension environment, I'd have to embed it and re-engineer the table to include it. And then I'd have to look at changing all the different source jobs that include supplier that include product, to include the new target, and maybe do some remapping. And I'd have to also look at all the jobs, at least from a regression perspective, that use that data in product, and look at re-engineering implications for all the jobs that use it for downstream deliveries. And then you have a data migration issue. And then, of course, all the prior historical records don't have a connection to suppliers. So you'd have to figure out, do I include that or leave it as a null key reference for prior historical records and whatever. Here, if you notice, the model that stood before we made the change hasn't been impacted at all, which is cool, because that means there is no impact on anything you were running before. And again, that's what supports this kind of fluid incremental build. And of course, the same would be true for adding a satellite to one of the hubs that's already there. It's, again, no impact to anything that was there before. So that's the big benefit, I would say, of those approaches. I know I've got 2 minutes left, and so I'm going to just quickly show you one other thing, and I'll go back to this picture. This has been around for a while, but I figured I'd throw it out there just for fun. It's modeling in 5 minutes, but I'm going to do modeling in 1 minute and 55 seconds. All right, all data modeling. You ready? Here it goes. Data modeling in a few minutes. Background: we store data in tables, like customer table. And do you have a list of customers? How? We design tables in the database. Customer, employee, sale. What tables do we have? We design the attributes, the context of how we describe them. We insert those into the tables. We then design relationships that can be enforced that say, this is how a sale relates to a customer and employee. Then we have identifiers, which of course are in red here. we need to find things and look them up. In order to look them up, we need to have a unique instance, i.e., in this case, unique identifiers. That's the theory of basically all modeling. In practice, that means, and like if I have a friend list, I have a friend, they belong to a family, they have activities. Well, core business concepts, friend, family, contact, and activity. The concept model, family has many friends, they have a multiple relationship here with activities, and I have a relationship with those friends. Concept model, right? Conceptual data have attribute clusters in this case, which could be compound or atomic attributes depending on how you do it. And we name the relationships. Friend is a member of family, activity is liked by, or friend likes this activity, and I am friends with that. I am the contact. Logical data model looks good, but the logical has here many-to-many relationships. So I have to augment that for a physical with associative entities to break the many-to-many. And then, of course, the vault model, which looks very similar, right? Except I've now separated the context from the key. And of course, the relationships are all just many-to-many. So there we go. That's just your quick flow of data modeling in what was 2 minutes, because I heard my alarm just go off. And that's it. Let's see. Sorry, go back up. There we have it. I don't know if we do some more time for Q&A or not, guys. It's up to you guys. What I will tell you is that Remco, who is on the call, and he did a presentation for you guys before I know, is actually got a tricky email called remco@geneseeacademy.com. My email is hans@geneseeacademy.com. If you have follow-on questions, please feel free to just ping us via email for any further clarification if you'd like. There's some standards on vault modeling on dbstandards.com. Elm is Ensemble Logical Modeling, basically the business mapping version of what we do with Vault. And then, of course, there's certification and training that we do. And that's, I think you all know that. Howard, I'll leave it to you as to where we drive from here.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'll keep on asking some of the questions, Hans. I think
Good.
if people want to drop off, that's fine. And if you have enough time. So we did have an interesting question from John O'Gorman. I know that Remco's answered it, but I think it's a very important message. And John asked, if you have supplier and manufacturer, would you, and this was an important point in terms of if they're not the same, if the definition is not just the same meaning but different words for the same entity, how would you go about modeling it? Would you almost create a supplier hub and then a manufacturer hub and almost have a similar amount of tables just with different names in terms of phone and things like that? I'm not sure if I'm explaining it properly.
No, yeah, no, you definitely are. That's super interesting. What I can tell you is that we have found a super interesting thing to have happen here, which is we focus on what's called core business concept, which means that a supplier and manufacturer are not even significantly, but markedly different from each other. They have different attribution. They mean something different. The domain values for supplier and for manufacturer, though there might be some concentric overlap, are really two different data sets for domain values because they mean different things. They also could be related to the model in different forms of linked relations. So in that case, we would definitely model them separately, right? And to carry on to that point, I mean, one of the things that has happened a lot with modeling is that we have this idea that what we want to do is get more generic, right? In order to accommodate more possibilities of what could be loaded into the model. And this we've now discovered. And by the way, you know, we are still crawling infants at this point. I mean, toddlers rather. We're just crawling, right? We're not even walking yet in this industry. And I think that's why we keep discovering things like the business orientation versus source, and in this case also the core business concept versus generic. Yes, I recognize generic is still a prevalent paradigm, but it's not getting us there. Just like our prior approaches really haven't gotten us there. What we're finding now is that when you do the cliff dive and you go into core business concept and you separate things like mechanic from employee, and you say, well, wait, a mechanic is an employee. Yeah, they are. But the problem is mechanics have specializations and certifications, and they're involved in doing repairs and work, and they are a subclass that is substantially different enough that the business views them as being separate, right? And you say, oh shoot, but if we do that, I have a perceived hierarchy, and then I got to make every employee type a lower level, and then we're going to have this model explode. Well, as it turns out, that will never happen. We don't actually manage businesses that way. We manage businesses on core business concept delineations. And so when you allow yourself to say, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and believe that this isn't going to get out of hand, right? Then we can actually have those CBCs we refer to, core business concepts, exist on their own, supplier, manufacturer, and if we need to look at them as a whole for some kind of a higher level of reporting at one point, then we aggregate them. We report on them by combining them in reporting. And if you think about it, it's basically the opposite end of what we've been trying to do, which is we consolidate the hell out of it to where it's just involved party. And then when we report on it, we have to do the subsetting and then the subclassing of relations and type relations. And all of a sudden get into this massive complexity and a disconnect from a business understanding. This is a principle also has to do with the fact that that we as humans don't manage anything that goes beyond the realm of 3 to 7 I guess pertinent variations. And I know it sounds a little bit like you know, black magic here or some kind of odd thing that we're doing, but the point is it actually is profoundly prevalent, and it works fine. So I don't know if that helps to answer it, but yeah.
I hope so, and I think Mark Atkins will also agree when he focuses on business glossary and writing definitions. He also attempts to avoid all of the abstraction and genericism that leads to all sorts of complications. Mark, is that correct? Also your view as well?
Absolutely. So we find with working with our clients in that by managing to separate all of the business concepts and clarifying those different things that kind of tend to morph together in the business world, by getting clear separation of those concepts, actually the light bulbs come on in the organization, and they start to figure out that, oh my God, you know, I've been saying this thing and, you know, I've been misunderstood because I'm being saying something and it's been misinterpreted because it's been interpreted as something else. So we're very, very clear on within our business glossary and our business terminology work that we do. And to be honest, let me just take a step back. We're often told that it's impossible to get an organization to really understand their business terminology. Our experience is not that. Our experience is that by working with the business community, they really, really do understand, once you start working with them, that these things that they talk about are different things, you know, like customer and product and so on. And it's those fundamental core concepts that get misinterpreted through the, you know, the water cooler discussions and so on. And yeah, I mean, we've had clients where, you know, the concept of a student, right, what constitutes a student, has caused financial loss for the university, because they have miscounted their students because of their understanding of what a student is. You know, and these are significant, just significant standard concepts, core concepts. Everyone knows what a student is, right? But really, they don't, because they all have a different interpretation for their own environments. You know, those that are in the university studies for, you know, the librarian studies and so on, they want to keep the numbers as low as possible. So their number of students they want to keep low, right? Those that are in the marketing department, they want to keep the numbers high. So there's these internal conflicts. But if you can get those clear definitions for those business terms, it really, really does make a big difference. Sorry, I've kind of gone off on a bit of a...
No. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I think that's exactly, I think, where we're all hitting. And, you know, it's interesting because I think that, you know, Remco and myself, others in our consortium and such, you know, we were kind of, I would say, following the trend in a way with this kind of logical modeling approach, business mapping approach. But let's put it this way: when you jump into the void, and then you realize that there's a foundation there that's solid, that's a pretty nice thing to know. So, like, for our purposes, once you start to say, oh, you know, manufacturer is different than you know, supplier, whatever, or mechanics should be separate from employee, even though they are an employee. You know, our fear is, as modelers, is that theoretically, conceptually, this could just blow out of proportion and be crazy. There's no balance, right? It's unbounded. As it turns out, it is 100% solid and bounded if your focus is entirely with the business, because the business can't manage what they do if they haven't broken this down into discernible and limited sets of concepts, right? So once we uncover those, we're talking exactly their language. And there's no problem in, you know, I think we've tried to convince them of our position before. So when they say, oh yeah, then we have a mechanic. Oh, well, you mean employee. And they're like, yeah, no, I meant mechanic. No, they're just employees though, right? And then you go to the next level and they go, well, no, you just mean involved party. Involved party? They go, no, yeah, because there's someone we interact, an organization or person we interact with, right? So that's involved party. It's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, in the end, it's like those artificial abstractions, that's on us. You know, that never came from business, right? So now we say, okay, wait, let's go back and listen to them. What do they tell us? I definitely, one of the fun things is we have this presentation on the magic of 7, which basically the bottom line of it is that, you know, we are grabbing data from systems that have automated organizational functions that are run by people. People are limited to 3 to 7 in their concepts, and so is all business and all organizations. We're also providing reporting for people and organizations who need to analyze and ask questions that are also bound by the same 3 to 7. So in the end, it's as if we have the template in a business map on both ends, and in the middle, it should also represent the same, instead of, in the middle being the warehouse, instead of doing some kind of weird transformation and abstraction in a central layer, which people that created the data don't understand, people that are reporting on the data don't understand, then puts us in the middle of a, interpretation gap.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
It looks like there was one other question. I can't tell.
Roger. There's quite a few. Roger, any from your side?
Yes, okay. Basically, I saw it in the chat. It was a question, but it's one that's close to what I do. I have a software development tool that has a data modeling capability within it that uses a narrative, and it's designed for data integration, and in particular for developing canonical data models. And the question that was on your chat board was from one of the other participants. They suggested that a good way to develop a data vault model was to first develop a canonical model. And I've actually been working with one of the data vault consultants here on using our tool for developing data vault models. And it seemed to us that actually developing a data vault model from a canonical model, so it's a two-step process. First, you analyze your legacy system to develop your canonical model. That ends up creating a model that has, in one sense, and this is a longer discussion, has no keys at all. So it's a non-key model. It just is a model of concepts. But then we just started creating the links, hubs, and satellites, and we found the process much simpler, having basically created our conceptual model, if you will, in the first instance. Have you got a comment on that, Hans? And it's actually nice to meet you again. I heard you talking in New Zealand years ago.
Oh, you did? Great. Well, good to see you as well. That's great. Yeah, no, I would tell you that there's a lot of different models, many different forms, obviously, of canonical models, of let's say even graph-like models, node edge, different approaches you can take to capturing concepts and their relationships. I like what you said about focusing first on a non-keyed model, so you're not getting into the technicalities of the relationships so much as you are. It's just a snapshot of the big picture, right, of what's there. I would say all of these are possibilities and things that people have been using with regard to a starting point for these kind of models. So I think they're definitely all valid, and I'd love to see what you're doing, what you're looking at there. One thing we found is so long as the theories behind those models or business maps are not to abstract or make generic those concepts, but to stay within the true pure business definitions or conversation, even I would say the business conversation, then you're in good shape. As soon as we start to say, well, these are all just the same and abstracted, that's where we fall down pretty hard. And I think that's the thing we want to try to avoid doing, is to get into those abstractions. In our organization right now, one of the things we focus on is what we call ensemble logical modeling. And if you look at, I think there were a bunch of slides and notes on that from Remco's prior presentation with you guys. Basically, the idea there is that we use the same principles of ensemble modeling, unified decomposition, and we apply those to pure, more business mapping, concept modeling paradigm. So it's not a specification for the template, let's say the blueprint for the database deployment. It's more a communication tool with the business, which happens to then more one-to-one coincide with it. But of course, Remco, myself, and others will tell you, capture the business model through whatever means that can be translated then to more of a physical choice on an ensemble model. Whatever it is that works for the organization is 2 thumbs up. from our perspective. So absolutely. But I'd love to see what you have. So if you could ping me afterwards, that would be great.
Okay, cheers.
All right. So Hans, I have a last question that I'd like to ask, and that's I really got excited when you started mentioning master data in your book, when you start looking at how this can be applied on master data. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the comment on when those satellites, almost in that situation, they're coming from different sources. So there's no, it's not really saying that one is the last one is the most up-to-date one, because you've actually now got information coming from multiple sources and you're not sure which one's right. So that was my question in terms of, I liked your idea of using this for master data. It must also avoid trying to get into that abstracted party domain, which everyone is raving about because of the challenges. But how do you manage then all of this data? It's almost like an integration layer that you built, and then presenting it and reconciling it across these different areas from a master data point of view. I'd love to hear your views on that.
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We haven't really talked much about the use in master data in recent years, but I would tell you that the thing that became clear is what we're trying to accomplish in the master data management realm, right, is to get from a enterprise integration perspective a snapshot of a conformed concept, right, that should tie out and mean the same. But of course, MDM has much more of an operational system implication, meaning that you have like customer data integration initiative that might result from it, where you have one definition from a master data perspective of all customers, of all products, of all whatever. And because it's an integration discussion, and because it can relate to different levels of grain, right? A mechanic can also be an employee, which is higher level. It's the whole idea of using links and various forms of attribution in satellites just lends itself super well to an MDM initiative. So I would say they're kind of like the flip side of a coin, from the warehousing to the operational elements of MDM. They're two parts of the same coin in a way. So they're very much like, I guess, sister activities, and they feed each other. So I think it works really well. As it turns out, back in that day, and also even currently today, master data management solutions tend to be built on proprietary architectures of, how those terms are not just defined more specifically, but then how they're also delivered and maintained and managed, which is the huge part of it, right? Because it's one thing to go through and define it all. It's another thing to disseminate that information across the organization and then have it managed and versioned over time. And that's where I think the specific tooling and the theories combine to the offerings we have today. But if you were doing it on your own, and that's what we still have today as organizations creating an MDM initiative just on their own, the Vault model works great for it. I don't know if that helps. And the second part of your question, I'm sorry, was around something else.
Yeah. So basically, what I'm thinking of is that Vault model can actually play two roles. One is the ability to bring all the data about the customer together in one area in terms of your integration, and also the start of your enterprise data warehouse. So you almost get a double benefit there. Yes, one would look to consolidate in terms of the master data into a final version or an agreed version if one is different to the other. For example, the home address. So you'd have a different home phone number from one record source compared to another record source. So now in terms of saying, you're not really saying who is the latest version. I just got different versions from different sources.
Yep.
If we go back to Mark's idea of is current, that's not really appropriate, because these are the different sources that's their view on it.
Yeah, I think you need to couple those with maybe is current, and then also like is gold. Is this the gold record that you want to consider to be the one we're going to use? And by the way, I mean, if you wanted to kind of combine purposes to have it be more of an operational MDM, here's the gold record for the client as it currently stands, or the product, or whatever. I'm not a person that feels like those lines need to be strictly delineated. I think you can combine those purposes. The reason why there's any risk there still is that if you then were to allow people to get into augment or change as they're managing that definition, to augment or change something in the warehouse without going through the auditable source through to target path, then you kind of taint the warehouse model. Now, that being said, if you feed your changes through the architecture of source, lineage into the warehouse model, here's the gold record, and also separate perhaps all the elements of a gold record into its own satellite, then combining the two, I think, works just fine and beautifully, because there's no reason not to. So.
And I think John O'Gorman then raised an interesting point to say, if we do have these entities or concepts separated, if we are talking about the same individual across these entities, and I think Remco may have answered it, but I wasn't watching.
Yeah, sorry.
Remco, maybe you could explain your answer.
Yeah, well, I will, Howard. It is if we just say, hey, if for instance Hans is a student, he is also administrator, he is alumni, all at the same time, Hans will pop up as an individual in all three business concepts, right? Because sometimes he's a student, otherwise he's the administrator, and then he's alumni. But if you want to say, hey, we need to check out, can a student also be an alumni and also be an administrator? We can accommodate it with using relationships between the two to say, hey, oh, by the way, this student and this administrator, they're exactly the same. So we can accommodate for it. But we won't say, hey, looking at all the roles Hans has, you know what, 80% of the time he's just a student, so we just only store in a student and then give him other roles as well. Now we try to stay focused on these are the actual business concepts the business is talking about, and that way we put in.
But sorry, Remco, won't you get into some challenges there? For example, if you have two different systems and they've recorded the home phone incorrectly for John O'Gorman as an example, and you keep them separated, you're not going to have that need to get that conformity across all of those representations.
They're definitely a challenge, even if you say what you're saying, like we have we get two different identifiers for the same person, right? Then you need to kind of relate the two together. You have to consolidate the two together. But also for us, we don't know if you have two different identifiers within the same business concept, two students, and they have two student IDs, but in fact, they're both the same person. We need to align those, but someone needs to tell us, probably from the business, say, oh, by the way, this ID and this ID actually are the same. And we have the construct we call same handling to say, to consolidate that one. And so we store it individually and then we consolidate using the same as link or others. If you have, I'm just looking at what John now is saying, right? The model has to assign different identifiers for each one.
Basically.
Yeah.
That's
but
what
we can accommodate. The only thing is, if we have different identifiers and we said then we need to align it, someone needs to tell us, oh, by the way, these need to be aligned.
Yes.
They are actually the same.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that, this has to do with, I think, warehousing theory as well as the technique for how we manage it. So if you look at it from this perspective, I think that the boundaries of the discussion probably are, you're going to end up with multiple instances of the same real life instance. In other words, so there's one Hans Hultgren here that, I mean, there's lots of Hans Hultgrens, but this particular one that you're looking at now may have in your system some kind of an identifier as a customer, another identifier as a vendor who also provides some services back to your organization, and maybe also another one for a logistics delivery location or whatever. Now, I recognize that there's one real life object, and it's not going to be our goal in the warehouse to consolidate all concepts that may happen to hold that same real life concept. Because again, if I'm in the CBC, the core business concept of employee, I'm going to be a record and employee. If I'm also a customer of that same company, as well as an employee, I'm going to be another record and a customer. So I don't want to consolidate those. But when it comes to associating 3 different keys of customer that happen to be the same, or I want to know that this customer is also this employee, we use the same thing. It's just a link. And we refer to it as the same as link, meaning this record is also this record. So that allows us to report off of, consolidate, understand. Here's everything Hans is to us, right? He's an employee and a customer and vendor. And I can look at the big picture if I want to through those links. Likewise, if I follow the theory of which records in customer you told me were the same, there's 3 of them for whatever reason, from different sources. If I consolidate all 3 of those, here's what Hans looks like with all his possible keys. We generally don't just toss them together, because as much as somebody will tell you, I'm 100% sure that the customer who came in on this key is actually the same customer who came in on this other key. Sure, and maybe that's true, and we can accommodate that. We load them to the same instance of a record, carry the other alternate keys in a bag of keys, satellite. We can do that, but it's always risky, because at some point you realize later, whoops, actually they're different. It turns out they weren't the same after all. So.
Fantastic. Hans, if I could just ask a last question. I had a really interesting discussion on our last DM block training, and one person said, but the enterprise data warehouse is dead. I think he was referring to the third normal form of enterprise data warehouse. And it was all this, it takes too long to build, so we just go and build data marts and things like that. And I said, but you need to be careful, because whilst that was true with 3NF, that I don't believe that's true for Data Vault or Anchor Vault modeling, because of that agility and flexibility that they've achieved. But it was amazing to see that there's still a lot of that thinking out there, and people that have that challenge.
Yeah, I think, let's put it this way. I think that we absolutely, and this is just, again, my opinion, but we absolutely unequivocally need to have an enterprise, integrated enterprise data platform to view our business in an enterprise view. We have to have it. And I think that, without getting into the tainting of the name data warehouse over the years, I mean, we all know technically it still falls into the purview of the idea of a data warehouse, the integrated, non-volatile, time variant, all that good stuff. So I think it's fair to still call it enterprise data warehouse. I think the places where we don't call it that is basically the ones where they've had 3 failures on a warehouse and trying different techniques, and nobody wants to hear that word again. Well, that's just, again, just semantics, right? But I think we're evolving, quite frankly, to a very realistic approach now that we haven't had before. And I think part of the realistic approach maybe even gets down to some of the discussions we had 20 years ago of the theory of good enough. And as my friend Lowell Fryman used to always say is, perfect is the enemy of the good. And so, if we're striving for this instantly available, enterprise-wide, complete data platform, it's just not realistic. I used to say, look, we're I'm Swedish, right? So we were Vikings. You can imagine there were 100 Viking ships out on the water, right? And then somebody says, you know, guess what? We should really align ourselves so we can get the fleet together and be on a common path. So let's all aim our ships at the North Star, and we'll kind of merge together and get ourselves together, right? Well, the theory isn't that we're going to lift out of the water and fly into space and go to the North Star. The theory is by focusing on that and working towards it and pointing towards that goal, we're going to get to a much, much better place than we are today. And I think that's what's true with warehousing is I don't think it's about that elusive end goal, you know, holy grail thing. It's the path that takes us here makes us perpetually better and better. And each iteration is providing us more benefit in a much more realistic way now than it did before. So I would say we keep striving for the perfect, and we're going to end up with really good interim solutions. So
fantastic. Thank you. I think we've got a last question by Mark. Mark, last question from yourself, and then I'd just like to ask Hans if you would recommend a best question or a best question person.
That's gonna be a tough one. Okay, go ahead. Let's see what the last one is first.
Mr. Mark.
Yeah.
You're on mute, Mark. Mark, you're on mute.
There we go. I've been doing data warehousing for more years than I care to divulge to everyone. But the point being is that there's all these opinions from different people, and data warehouses are often driven by enterprise architectural opinions of, oh, we have to do Inmon, or we have to do Kimball, or we have to do Data Vault, or whatever. And I strongly believe that there's actually a balance, because each of these solve a different organizational strategy, right? So Vault is really good at getting data in, and I still think there are certain challenges in then making that usable for business. There's talks about business Vault and so on, whereas Inmon's strategy is very quality and fit for purpose, and therefore it takes a long time, it costs a lot of money, and and then there's the Kimball architecture, which is all about let's just get it in there and report it. It's sort of like really quick. So I think every organization has different needs, and I don't think one architecture fits those needs on their own. I think there's a mix of architectures that need to be employed to make the organization work. Where was I going with this question?
Well, so far I'm just agreeing with everything, so that's fine.
Yeah. So I'm really just at the point where I guess my question is, Vault. Look, I like Vault because I think it's a really good means of just getting stuff sorted out. But I really do think that there are the business requirements of information is almost like a second step to getting your data loaded and accessible. And I think Vault is perhaps a really good way of getting data loaded and accessible. So where am I? I've lost my train of thought here, but I think that the point here is that there are different architectures solve different problems, and I think a mix of architectures can solve different business problems. So what is your feeling about that? There you go.
Well, no, I mean, I think there's a couple points to what you were discussing now. One is that, you know, you're going to have a solution where there's more than one layer, obviously, and more than one component of the architecture. Obviously, there's going to be operational reporting. There could even be, you know, from an operational perspective, integration through like a SOA for shared services, and that could also be reporting related. You have operational reporting, like a lot of the compliance initiatives for banks are more operational than they are warehousing. And then the warehouse itself, let's say vaulted, ultimately is going to be consumed. And when it gets consumed, it'll probably be represented in some other manner. Very commonly dimensional, but could be something different as well. I would say, though, that though Vault is strong for kind of bagging and tagging, as you say, like, you know, load the data from a source, that is not its purpose at all in my mind. I think it's really critically important, that aspect, because if we're just going to vault a source, as we say, you have 200 sources, you're going to have 200 vaults, and that's not going to help you at all. That's just going to be a fancy staging area. And unfortunately, a lot of the tooling focuses on this, just, hey, give me a model and I'll vault it for you and load data. Honestly, from our perspective, worthless, unless from a warehousing perspective. What's it useful for? A staging area. That's about it. So the point being that if we don't start with, and I think this whole session we've been discussing it, we need to start with that business map, that model, that canonical model, whatever it is that we start with that says, here's the business, and then we map the data from the sources to it. So we have a vaulted business model, map the data to it. If we don't go in that route, we're not going to get to our end goal at all. And unfortunately, it's noise, right? It's walking off the farm, it's noise, it's what looks like an interim success, but it's ultimately not getting us towards our goal. So I think that's an important one, is let's not relegate Vault to a technical component that loads data and makes it agile. Let's look at it as a embodiment of a realistic enterprise business warehouse that you can adapt over time.
That is refreshing to hear. Thank you. That's really good. Thank you.
Good.
Hans, thank you very much. Final, I'm not sure if you had any time to think about it. Yep. In terms of who do you think we should send the book to?
Well, I would say that that of course Mark gets the Frequency Award. I think Roger gets the I want to follow up with you on your discussions on Canonical Award. But I looked at John O, and I don't know.
John O'Gorman, yeah.
Because he brought up the thing about the student faculty administrator thing and the alumni roles, which got us, I think, was one of the factors that got us into that conversation about core business concept versus the abstracted and linked relations for same as. So I think we can select him potentially for the best question.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate we've gone almost 2 hours. Thank you very much for everything you've done and your contribution. I appreciate that. And I would love to take you up on that detail. We'd love to take you up on that further detail. So it'd be nice to see Data Vault Builder and then the third one, and then we can come back to you and show you all the different presentations and see where we can go from there. And Remco as well, of course. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Good to see you, Sean.
Nice seeing you again, Hans. Take care, man.
Take care.
We'll chat soon, eh?
Cheers, Hans. Thanks a lot for your time.
Cheers. Thanks. Take care.
Take care. All right. Bye.